To the Creative Writing Honors Thesis reading at Kelly Writers House. I'm Julia Block. I'm the director of the Creative Writing Program, and I'm so thrilled to be hearing from Creative Writing Honors Thesis students this evening. So every year, our program gives a limited number of students the opportunity to write a thesis for consideration of honors in the English major. And the goal is for students to envision and complete a substantial project that serves as the capstone of their creative writing career at Penn. So we see novellas, we see suites of poems, we see scripts, we see nonfiction and other nonfiction personal essays and journalistic writing, also hybrid and cross-genre projects that might combine writing with art, video, sound, or sculpture. And students preface the thesis with a substantial critical commentary that describes the conversation that they are entering with their projects. Tonight, we're going to hear excerpts from several of these creative projects. We're not at all going in alphabetical order, so you have a program in your hands that lists all of the students in our program. We're going to hear from most of those folks tonight, but I'm going to jumble the order a little bit. We're going to hear from each student for approximately 5 minutes. And I'm really thrilled that each student is going to be introduced by their advisor, who most of whom were able to join us in person tonight. We have someone joining us on Zoom, and I'll be reading a couple of introductions by advisors who couldn't be here. Please stick around after the reading for a very festive reception in the dining room, and I believe we can also spill out into the outdoor courtyard adjacent to the dining room. I want to say a special thanks to our friends at Kelly Writers House for hosting us tonight, Jessica Lowenthal, Ali Katz, and Zach Cardiner. This is maybe the 3rd or 4th year that we've done this reading, and it's always just a really meaningful way to wrap up the spring semester. So I'm going to keep my remarks very short. I'm going to actually end there, and I'm going to invite our first reader up to close to the podium, and I'm actually going to be reading their introduction. I'm going to be reading it on behalf of Tage Silverman, their advisor. So this is Tage Silverman introducing Quinn Gruber. And Tage writes, "I feel honored to introduce this thesis, in part for the elegant intelligence of its translated poems, but perhaps even more so for the work which its author has invested in it for the last 8 months. Almost every week since September, Quinn has come to my office with new pages and fresh research on the Florentine poet Margherita Guidacci, deeply engaging each word they have translated from Guidacci's 1946 collection, The Sand and the Angel, and connecting Guidacci's Italian translations of Emily Dickinson and John Donne with Guidacci's own poetry in brilliantly original ways. The overlaps between these 3 poets, their companionable yet transformative relationships with death, and their sense, as Quinn writes, that plants, animals, and even inorganic beings like stones live and die as we do, these overlaps are outlined beautifully in Quinn's introduction, creating a solid door through which to enter the translations. As to the translations, so carefully sieved and sculpted here, I am excited for this, your likely first encounter with this poetry, as it was mine when Quinn first approached me about the project last year. Since then, as Quinn has revised almost every line of this collection with some innate in them combination of respect, even reverence, and certainty, I have begun to engage with Guidacci's gem-like verse independently and intimately, sometimes sending stanzas to Italian friends for whom her work is also new, and who are equally compelled by her distilled and otherworldly voice. And our conversations about Guidacci continue. Quinn asks, in their introduction, what if we were to follow Margherita Guidacci's lead and reimagine translation as conversation and communion? Such a reimagining is entirely what Quinn has done here. They have given me a new poet to love, shaping the them between us always, to quote from one of Quinn's Guidacci poems, that is translation's footprint, and making our heavy, imperfect step into an ample, ongoing path. Please help me welcome Quinn Gruber.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to read some of the translations today. For some of the shorter poems, I'll read the Italian as well, just so you can get a sense of the sound of the original. So this is the second poem from Meditations and Statements. Il primo banchetto è di amore, sui riavanzi d'amore banchetta la febbre. Infine i vermi, dita sicure della morte, ci spogliamo ed aprono fino allo scheletro lucente. The first feast is love. On love's remains, fever feasts. Then the worms, sure fingers of death, undress and open us down to the glistening skeleton. Don't ask the flame to save you from the night. In the circle of shadows and howls, its reflection will dance in the eye of the waiting wolf. The glaring birds, agitated by the red that destroys the moth, will beat their wings more madly in your face. The fire was only lit as a sign for your heart. You leap and tremble with it until dawn comes. The sea's breaths are minutes of eternity. It rises and it expands and then recedes, and it compares itself to nothing, not to the ship that sets out, nor to the ship that sinks. Also, beyond your limits, the rose that sways in the wind announces an untouched season where only the gardens have a part, as does paradise, which the rose promises with its nocturnal fragrance. But such rare purity joins you, and, joined, it tears you apart, because you keep the breathless time in your heart. Epitaffio di morti in guerra. Epitaph of the war dead. Non per I nostri corpi che si risorgeranno dal mare o dai deserti ove li dispersi la sciagura fu posta questa pietra, ma perché tu, o passeggero, piamente ci ricordi prima del giorno del Signore. This stone was not placed for our bodies, which will resurface by the sea or deserts where disaster dispersed them, but because you, passenger, piously remember us before the day of God. Neither the broken branch nor the trampled grass on the paths told us of its passage, but the touch of solitude that each thing keeps inside itself and offered us, freeing after the usual message the other unknown word. How we startled listening to it, how securely it set our heart on the invisible trail. So we always followed you, ruler and beloved, and it didn't surprise us, the white light in which you walked unveiled at our side, now that the body's shadow has cut across death's meridian. Since for a long time we knew only you, we obeyed only you, your fated prey, dragging on the streets of the earth your strange celestial chain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quinn, and thank you for going first and opening our program. So our second reader is going to be Max Strickberger, and he will be introduced by Sam Apple. Can I ask Sam Apple to come up to the podium, please?
A little over a year ago, Max Strickberger reached out to me and asked what I thought about his idea of traveling across the country to record the stories of young people struggling with the pandemic. Had any other student suggested such an idea, I would have been pretty skeptical, but I already knew Max well enough to take him seriously. Max, who recently won the 2022 President's Prize, is the rare dreamer who seems to accomplish every last one of his dreams. Seriously, all of them. It's actually a little annoying. Fortunately for all of us, Max spends most of his time dreaming not about himself, but about how to help others. Also, fortunately for all of us, Max is a terrifically talented writer and editor. He not only recorded pandemic stories, but also edited and shaped them into gripping narratives that capture what it was like to live through the last few years in a way that very few other pieces on the pandemic have managed. Here is what one of the honors thesis judges wrote about Max's pandemic stories. This is a piece that will make any reader realize, yes, the pandemic has affected the elderly, the prone to disease, the lonely, but what about those whose lives were supposed to just be starting? What happens when that brand new engine stalls? It's a remarkable piece of work, and the author should be proud not only of his ability to evoke voice on the page, but also of his ability to stay still with someone else long enough to hear them. It is my great honor to introduce Max Strickberger.
A huge thank you to Sam for working with me on my thesis and encouraging my crazy ideas from the onset. Thank you. When I first told my mom I wanted to take the semester off from school, she cried. Penn had sent us home for Thanksgiving, and I had spent the last 3 weeks taking finals from my childhood bedroom. In between papers, I realized how unappealing another semester of online school seemed. That night, my dad made tahini eggplant steak, and my family sat around our kitchen table. I have my mom's eyes, and we cry similarly. Our jaws clench, and our eyes fill quickly but rarely spill over, like water resting on a countertop. Like me, my mom is more emotional. But unlike me, she's the ultimate pragmatist. She wanted to know if taking time off meant I'd never return to school. Would I graduate, find a job? Even if I did this trip, when I arrived in a town of strangers, how would I actually fill my time? Hour by hour, minute by minute. Maybe, somewhere in her stomach, she worried everything she created for me would crack. My dad was less concerned about the details. His soft face changed little as his large hands rested on the table. He wanted to know if this was something I had planned out. What were the pros and cons? What did I hope to achieve? Initially, I wasn't surprised by their hesitations. But the more I thought about it, much of this idea seemed to have been derived not from me, but from them. My mom had spent her 20s as a journalist covering violence against women during the Bosnian War and decrepit housing conditions in the Mississippi Delta. She believed in the power of stories, and ever since I was little, I did too. As a child, I had 3 famous words: story, story, story. My dad often emphasized one thing, tikkun olam, repairing the world. I was envious that his career as a doctor was so straightforward in that way. The more patients he helped, the more repairing he did. Storytelling felt like my way to start, however small, contributing to tikkun olam. 1 year later to the month, I didn't imagine I would be presenting my English honors thesis. I also didn't know that in the time in between, I'd have met the people that you're about to. In their own words, here are their stories. And I'm going to read part of Shay's, who we met in New Orleans. Shay moved to New Orleans 4 days before we met her. When her job at a Virginia-based insurance company turned remote, she moved 1,000 miles away. Her neighborhood is filled with colorful, bungalow-style homes that span the shades of the rainbow. She has a bright red couch, a mounted moose head, and a maroon arrow with glowing light bulbs around the edges. A pink hammer sits on the back of a couch for artwork she has yet to hang in her new home. And now this is Shay's voice. I'm the type of person who's looked at as an emotional support system. But during the pandemic, I couldn't hide behind other people's problems. Instead of watching everybody else, I watched myself. For the first time, I had to emotionally support Shay. The pandemic allowed me to deal with all the pain of my childhood. My mom is stricken with mental illness, and she didn't know how to handle life. She just felt stuck. Her fixing it was moving around. She had 2 famous words: let's go. At one point, I told my story to someone in college, and she said, "Shay, you realize you've moved over 40 times. I was like, what? I never counted. We never counted. We would just get up and go, get up and go, get up and go. So for a while, when people would express their adorations for me or love, I would run away. The pandemic was the first time where I was like, Shay, it's okay to accept love from people. Not everyone's a liar. It's important to emotionally process. And it's like, Shay, I love you. I call it the panoramic instead of calling it the pandemic because it gave me a full perspective on myself. My favorite part about moving here is the colorful houses and the smell of rain. I love rain, the way it melts into you. The people from here are so homey. Everyone I've interacted with has treated me as if they've been waiting to see me their entire lives. They say, "Welcome home, baby. Welcome home, baby." You hear that? I love that too. There's live music everywhere. That girl's carrying a trombone. Ain't nothing like music. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. We're going to hear next from Lulu Lippman, and Lulu will be introduced by Max Apple.
Congratulations to all of you. I'm happy to be here to introduce Lulu, who took a nonfiction class with me and did very well, and then took a fiction class and did not so well. But she began working on her thesis, and she taught herself something that's a trick that many fiction writers take longer than Lulu has taken to discover. Real experience can be transformed, reconfigured, restructured, lied about, and turned into compelling fiction. And that's what you're about to hear as Lulu reads to you about the adventures of Ella Garrison at a fancy prep school.
The end at the beginning. As I walked across the stage on graduation day, the air was hot and sticky, and the humidity made my hair puff out like a poodle. Mr. Rosen, our rector, shook my hand and handed me my diploma. I was officially a Thornwall Academy alumna. What an anticlimactic ending to an extremely tumultuous 3 years. I considered purposely tripping on my way off the stage for dramatic flair, but I stopped myself. My family was sitting smack in the middle of the first row, and I could only imagine my brother Jamie shaking his head in disappointment if I went through with it. Smiling, I descended the stairs with grace, hoping the hired photographer would snap a great photo of me. I walked to the left and joined the rest of my class as we waited for everyone to get their diplomas. As I approached the gaggle of my peers who donned white dresses and preppy forest green crew blazers, I began to cry. "Oh, Ella, it's okay, we'll stay in touch," a girl named Haley said, going in for a tender side hug that I begrudgingly obliged. "Thanks, Haley," I replied, wiping snot from my nose. Little did she know I wasn't crying about how much I'd miss my friends or my dorm or anything like that. Sure, I was sad, goodbyes are always hard, but I was crying out of pure, unadulterated relief. Somehow, by sheer luck, or the power of God and Jesus, who I'd become strongly acquainted with during the countless mornings of mandatory chapel, I graduated. Somehow, in Thornwall lingo, I didn't get God. Fourth form. When my parents told me I had a choice if I wanted to go to Thornwall or not, I knew it was Hobson's choice. Sure, superficially, they gave me the option to stay in San Francisco, but I knew I had to go. Thornwall was in my blood. My dad and his brother had gone in the 80s and loved the school. Growing up, my dad would talk to me about his alma mater and take me to see the annual crew races. He would tell me how excited he was for me to be a Thornwall tree frog. Yes, I too wish we had a less stupid mascot. So I was going to Thornwall whether I liked it or not. When I was in 7th grade, my brother left to go. Jamie did not have any reservations. He was so excited to leave that during move-in, while my mom held back tears, overwhelmed that our only son was leaving the nest, Jamie gave us only a cursory, "Goodbye, love you," before running off with his new friends. At school, Jamie rarely called, because he was a boy and he'd forget, so my mom would have to email his advisor for updates, and the updates were always positive. Jamie was a Thornwall Golden Boy. By the time he graduated, his titles included head prefect, salutatorian, debate team captain, and starter of the lacrosse team. Not to mention beautiful girlfriend and a big group of friends. I could not fathom how my messy, lazy, golden retriever of a brother had managed to pull all of this off at the ripe age of 18. To be honest, all of Jamie's success made me a little hesitant about going. I had giant size 13 shoes to fill, and I was scared of living in a shadow. Also, I loved my school and the life I established in San Francisco. None of my friends understood why I was leaving to go to a school in the middle of nowhere, 3,023.87 miles away from home. Boarding school isn't really a thing on the West Coast like it is on the East Coast. In some elite circles in New York, it's almost taboo to not go to boarding school. Alternatively, in California, usually it's taboo to go to boarding school. Only 2 girls from my middle school did. One attended the Edgewater School in Utah, which was for troubled girls, and the other went to an exclusive boarding school in Malibu, which is just a nicer way of saying rehab. Because of my hesitation, my parents let me stay an extra year in San Francisco, so I ended up matriculating to Thornwall as a new 4th former. This was the first term of Thornwall lingo I learned. Form meant year. Don't ask me why. Thornwall doesn't just use the same terminology as every other high school in America does. When move-in day rolled around, we drove up to campus, and many of my worries dissipated. Thornwall was stunning. The campus was bigger than most colleges and prettier than I remembered. The school owned 2,500 acres of land with 2 ponds, a lake, 25 academic buildings, and even secret sex cabins in the woods if you believe the rumors. Although I had visited the school countless times, this time it felt different. This time it was permanent. My parents, who were now pros at the move-in process, moved me into my dorm in record speed. The goodbye was a little harder for me than Jamie's was, and I squeezed my mom tightly and promised to call her more than my brother did. Although I was sad when they left, I was eager to go to the famed first night dinner. Our dining hall always gave off a regal feel, but during special occasions, it resembled the Great Hall from Harry Potter. There were candles everywhere, and the school even whipped out their fine china for the evening. They served lobster and steak and tiramisu. I chowed down with my new dorm mates whose names I didn't remember. Later that night, my stomach made such loud noises that my roommate Gabrielle woke up. You know how people say go with your gut? Well, as I sat on the toilet that night for hours, I realized my gut was giving me a pretty strong indication of what was to come.
Thank you, Lulu. Our next reader is going to be Jamie Albrecht, and Jamie will be introduced by me. Jamie Albrecht's manuscript, What Have You, is one of the most formally exciting, thematically urgent, thrillingly genre-bending, and intellectually curious projects I've ever seen from an undergraduate writer. I was like editing my intro because that's kind of in the spirit of Jamie's own work. Jamie's practice is one of constant editing, so somehow I felt compelled to edit. Now I can't read my own edits. Okay, so when Jamie first approached me to advise this project, it lived in 3 separate sections. There was one having to do with Jack Spicer, another with W.B. Yeats, and a third a poetic essay on, quote, the ways in which texts and bodies inform each other. And the project has since morphed into what I would consider a long poem that is as ambitious in its formal range as it is impressively moving in its ethical commitments. First, about the formal range, Jamie inhales sources as a researcher, and the work is citational and intertextual in ways that range from homage to absolutely crucial critique. Jamie mixes poetry and prose in ways that go beyond hybridity for the sake of formal twists and turns. Instead, there's a constant awareness of how forms build on each other, as when a particular image asks for a swerve or a narrative drop on the page. The project plays with intensity and duration and minimalism, with documentary practices and maximalism and confessionalism. And Jamie and I have met frequently to discuss how form can not just convey, but embody content, particularly content that demands a form adequate to its emotional or political difficulty. In one process note he wrote last fall, Jamie asked, "How can I interrupt and write confined?" I think it's a beautifully elliptical question that captures the way form, including form that gets tweaked and interrupted by an intertext or a sudden line break or a big block of prose or a screenshot of a viral tweet or an annotated convenience store cash register receipt, can be achingly precise. Jamie's project is one in which constant interruption offers containers for meaning. And that difficulty and intensity leads me to my second point about what I love most about this project, which is its sense of ethics, its unrelenting commitment to questioning the politics of appropriation, of accretion, of citation, of relation between things and texts and bodies. Over the past many months, we've spent discussing drafts and reading lists. I have witnessed Jamie's poetic practice wrestle with a core set of questions that I would characterize as ethical. What is the role of poetry in how we relate to each other? How can multiple languages coexist in a single body? What sorts of risks does language allow us to take? And what are the politics of editing risky language for a reader's consumption? I am really excited to hear Jamie read from this extraordinary project tonight, and I'm really excited that all of you get to hear from it as well. Please help me welcome Jamie Albrecht.
Yeah, she wasn't kidding about the editing. All right, this is from the oldest and the newest part of the manuscript. To internalize a statement, Eva. At some point in my life, I will be fat. Despite the weed of the past, my memory still functions, at least with a photo. In his Pittsburgh Pirates uniform, a younger Jamie stands holding a slanted silver bat, smiling with all 6 teeth to his name. His belly bulges firmly against white baseball pants, and his smile splits the picture. What brilliance. His parents are probably on the other side of the camera. They aren't taking the picture. What love. This little boy is going to waste, going to squander, love as easy as time on a Sunday afternoon. I couldn't say if the consistent climb of pounds to a weekend of a single meatball to a month of cashews, just cashews, therefore gnarly shits, to lifting and lots of enriched yogurt could be conceived in his sweet, dirty blonde head. He was terrified of SpongeBob because it made him so acutely aware of doing nothing while time passed by. Ugochi says of that child, baby Jamie, ready to play, little pouch, note 7. Bracketing can maybe be zoological or chthonic. Mom and Dad's hard drive crashed in like 2010, and most of our photos were lost. But those littered around the house, those either too precious to relegate to a digital space, or not precious enough to digitize, remain. I want to know if I was happy. I want to know if I am happy. End note. Staring down at the threadbare near tear in my dockers, at the vague shade of my dick to remind you of part of my sex, Eva talks to us at the dinner table. Our desires and their consequent fat phobia, a conversation over Kia's layered cake, to give words in all their breathing room, Ziegelbäum, 2 photographs in the fat sonnets. I'd finally mastered how to stay alive, just enough not to die. Look. How little to do but observe sideways at the overlarge crinkle at the halfway point of my torso, the morning after sex. Is the project of gathering as against hope as sitting silent against Eva, who is expressing love. The thought, I can desire to tailor myself without care for good or care. But the world of things, blindly grouping what I have. How to add imagination to this algorithm. How to care to desire to shape it and care to release. A trickle of seminal frosting pooling in the divot in the center of the crystal tray. The knife passes through it and retreats backwards. To undo the cover of coral jam and give it a gap. Now this second slice of cake is a connection. Its second half sliding to Kayla, who licks jam from the plate and resents me for taking. Note 9, Ziegelbäum, fat, adjective. The new millennium says we can love ourselves. And it's kind of funny when it doesn't happen. Oh, noontime succubus. Oh, frozen banana. Oh, titillating pica. If you can give me an enchanted shovel to make digging easier, then I'll dig. Turn to simple sugar as motivation, a simple decision to be familiar and venomously stable, to get the keys to my own rainbow vomit kingdom, to a consumer's pride. Kia was 2 months late, knew the world was either confusion or surrender, was an either-or situation. Note 48, Henry J. Carr, J., July 9th, 2017, I miss you. It's comfortable down here. I still won't delete TikTok. Wasted time not being the exception, but the gruel, the bread and butter, rather veg in the amnion, enuresis, its magnetism, liking it and liking it anyway. You didn't have to ask to be born, just fucked around, just found out. Timor mortis conturbat me, note 49. Oh, Dunbar, honestly not sure if he wrote anything else worth my time, or if it's sick or twisted, or just kind of funny that all we remember of him is his remembering of other dead people. And note, no more bottle caps. Shit. No more pretty flowers, just bottle caps. No more river crossings, just Monster High dolls. No more celestial odix, just tuna cans open or closed, food or scraps. No more piquant sauces, just jars and jars of IHOP strawberry syrup. No more Gothic spires, just split levels on the plains. No more churchyard cemeteries, just curious bites of chalk. Nothing lethal. No more rose-fingered dawn, just placid batches of impatience. No more calculated dishabille, just puppet shows and bimbofication. Just Lucy's Aunt Jamie's yarn, just renegade dances, just fans, just transitive qualities. Just the scary twisting towards death with all the substitutions plotting the way. Staying the moment where all value assumes total likeness, assumes lossless compression, totally gray. Note 50. Gray afterlives used to terrify me. Total tranquility, a lack of action. At least in hell, something is happening. But maybe hell was just better because it was familiar, not by virtue of any activity or passivity of the soul. Maybe I preferred heaven or hell because any organization was a virtue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Next, we're going to hear from Mehek Boparai, and I'm going to read the introduction for Mehek on behalf of advisor Paul Saint-Amour. And Paul writes, if you only know Mehek a little bit, it may be as the member of the class of 2022 who represented Penn in the Jeopardy! National College Championship this February. But if you know her better, you're probably aware that she was a Real Arts at Penn intern at McSweeney's in summer 2020, that she's been a writer and editor at 34th Street Magazine for most of her time here at Penn, and that she has a long-standing fascination with modernist poetry and short fiction. That fascination led to her initial plan to write an honors thesis in the form of a collection of stories after the examples of James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, Ernest Hemingway, and Raymond Carver. Over time, though, these short stories grew together into a novella that had her consulting the likes of Anna Burns, Rachel Cusk, and Kazuo Ishiguro, contemporary writers who use first-person narrative to produce obliquity, opacity, and even self-concealment. Mehek's finished work, called The Drag, is a study in self-withholding and ambivalent self-scrutiny on the part of Zora, its Indian-American narrator, as she drifts through her final year of college, hoping to encounter a way, as her friend Gail puts it, to wake up. Throughout the piece, Mehek rings the changes on her title word, drag, whose many meanings, to sip, to inhale, to haul, to prolong, to crawl by, to humiliate, a bore, a bummer, a pull, bob to the novella's surface like the wreckage from a disaster that no one witnessed. Although the drag is full of tributes to the stories, poems, and films Mehek most admires, it achieves escape velocity to become its own free vehicle. One can only guess at its itinerary, but, like Mehek's own, it's sure to be worth following. Please join me in welcoming Mehek Boparai.
Thank you, Dr. Block. I guess Jeopardy will never escape me, no matter how much I try. So for some context, this excerpt comes from the scene when my protagonist gets kissed by the boyfriend of her best friend, which is the steamiest it will ever get. Yes. Yes, it's not as messy as it seems. Okay. I spent finals week doubled over on my bathroom floor, vacillating between throwing up and banging out the last pages of my Wolf research paper. It was food poisoning. Some pre-made sandwich I had grabbed on my way to my poetry workshop tore open my insides and left room not even for water. I didn't tell anyone I was ill, even Eve, because I knew she'd drop her work to hold my hair back and bring me prescription medication I could do without. I hadn't seen Eve since the kiss. I couldn't. The warmth in her face would burn right through me and leave my remains scattered above the snow. None of us had spoken much since that night, and following the kiss, I pushed Jack off and left before Liam could come out of the room. I couldn't even tell Gail. I didn't want to dilute the Madonna image he had curated for me in the foreground of his mind. The stomach bug was as close to heaven as I would have known, and when I recovered and submitted my last essay, I flew home with my phone off. On the drive home from the airport, my mother spoke to me in Punjabi with the sleepy tone she always took when happy. "You're not eating," she said. It was true. Liam's constant supply of cigarettes made it easy to avoid meals, and I spent 2 days trying to get the smell out of my hair. "I just threw up for 3 days, Mama. There's not much in me right now." "Still, your face has gone sallow. Did you get an abortion?" I placed my hand over hers, the other clutching the strap of my backpack I was too tired to take off. That's a sick joke. I see it in the clinic all the time. Girls coming in with babies in their stomach and leaving with holes where their eyes should be. If I got an abortion, I'd tell you. She hummed along to the Christmas music on the radio. "How is Rohan? You don't talk about him anymore when you call." I mentioned him to her once, my second year of college, when she whined about how I kept life too private. "He's been busy, but I met his boyfriend." "Is he also Sikh?" "No, Mama, he's a 6-foot white man." "Maybe he'll convert for him," she said as she laughed. My family never took religion seriously beyond the cultural fabric it was netted in. My mother was the only one who routinely went to worship. And I thought she was the only one to believe in God, until one night when I was 15 and my brother moved back home so my parents could monitor his addiction. He was much worse then. I was the only member of the household he could stand to talk to because we'd only talk about books. I would visit the library when he wasn't allowed to drive anywhere and convince the librarians to let me check out more than the limit, carrying stacks of Dostoevsky and Joyce in my arms to unload on his dirty desk weekly. It was the night I was delivering a copy of The Plague when I caught him kneeling by his bed, eyes tightly closed. "What are you doing?" "I'm praying." He continued, either unbothered by my presence or letting me watch. I didn't ask what he was praying for. Maybe an apology to my parents for wrinkling their foreheads permanently, or to one day be able to graduate university. Like most of my memories of those days, the edges were blurry and contorted. But selfishly, I remember hoping he was praying to return to the boy I once saw him as, video game controller in hand, as I kept him company every time a new game was released. The guilt from it sent me out of the room, and I forgot about the books I brought until they were a week overdue and I had to drag quarters downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehek. Next, we're going to hear from Sully Burns. Sully, are you here? Yes, hello. So Waiki Wang, Sully's advisor, wasn't able to be with us. I'm going to read an introduction that Waiki sent to me. Sully took his first class with me freshman year. It was an intro writing workshop, and he sat in the back. He was quiet, unassuming, exceedingly polite, and on my course roster, his first name was not Sully, but he told me to call him that. So for a few weeks, I thought, who is this kid? Then I read his first story about a summer trip to France, about a grandfather and 2 grandsons, and I realized he was the best writer in the class. 2 years later, Sully took my autofiction class. We were 7 faces on a small Zoom screen during COVID, and he continued to write these brilliant stories about family, friends that spared no tenderness or grace. Sully's thesis flows along the same vein. The narrator is an observer, a thinker, a biker, a walker, a flaneur, a man on a journey, but notably, this narrator is someone who is so present in his beloved world of Philly and yet so vulnerable on the page. Sully has never failed to write an incredible first line, and the first of his thesis, Invisible Mending, is, "The city of Philadelphia has an area of 141.7 miles, and I occasionally wonder how many of them I've walked." I am immensely proud of the craftsman that Sully has become. We can expect great sentences from him and great stories. Please welcome Sully Burns.
Thank you. And big thank you to Wiki, too, because she really saved me at the end of this process. I'm a very big procrastinator, and she really, kept me in check. And so there's a reason that this is finished, and it's her. But I'm just going to read the first 5 pages and give you a taste of what it is. Invisible Mending. A loop around Palumbo between 9th and 10th, Bainbridge and Fitzwater. A portly, blonde South Philadelphia woman lectures her son on their front stoop about his habit of roughhousing too roughly with his little brother. A pickup game of soccer in the park. Muffled voices shouting for the ball, and a few tweets from what sounds like a well-worn whistle held by the referee, who's wearing a white Eagles sweatshirt, basketball shorts, and Timberlands. An elderly couple who are holding hands, asking where to find the Italian market. Which direction is that? Is that too far for old folks to walk? Thank you, young man. A game of some sport, I'm not sure which, flashing through the window of the living room in one of the apartments on 9th across from the park. A crowd outside of Angelo's, the whole neighborhood waiting for their pizzas and cheesesteaks. An extremely impatient man, dressed head to toe in Phillies paraphernalia, taps his foot up and down while he sips a Miller Lite. You see the Sixers last night? His hoodie and shorts wearing counterpart asks. Several cans of Miller decorate the sidewalk below them, accompanied by a scattering of cigarette butts from earlier in the day. Someone will come to sweep them up. A man calls me a dumbass as he walked off, having found the ticket secured to his windshield. Birds chirping up above the corner at 10th and Bainbridge, like their counterparts frozen in the mural behind them. A couple of kids running around on Delhi Street, down from the mural on the corner, chasing after each other before an inevitable fall and cry for mom. Basketballs, bouncing on the blue courts in the corner of the park, with two kids struggling to understand the rules of the game on one side, and an intense pickup game on the other. A bunch of dudes shout, "And one," after a tough shot through contact by an overweight post specialist. Morning Glory Diner closing shop for the day, waiters clearing tables and stacking chairs as they get ready to head home. The city of Philadelphia has an area of 141.7 miles, and I occasionally wonder how many of them I've walked. On some days, I cover more ground than others, winding back and through entire neighborhoods before moving on. By nightfall, I'm almost always exhausted, and I cycle home slowly, shove my bike through the door, and drag it up the narrow staircase before stumbling down the hallway to my room and the solace of my bed. Beep! Sunlight spat in my face as I scavenged for the last seconds of unconsciousness that might have been left hiding between the sheets and the duvet. Finding none, I threw my feet down onto the floor. Throwing may sound a little violent, but it's not a high drop without a bed frame. Beep, beep, beep. The bare white walls of the room ensure that each day begins with physical suffering, and I shielded my eyes with one arm as I made my way across the cheap hardwood floors. The space itself was so empty that only a desk in the corner, which I never used, separated it from that of a squatter. I did have decor, though. One poster I'd brought back from a trip years ago hung facing me on the opposite wall. Visit Indiana. 36,000 square miles of corn. I'm in no particular rush. My first steps of the morning were narrated by a crack in my ankle, a pop in my left knee, and a fuck as I stubbed my toe on the edge of the bureau in the hallway. Against all orthopedic odds, I arrived at the bathroom and carried out my biological duties. In the shower, I stood, staring at the beige tiles sloppily tilting and overlapped, stuck down haphazardly by the imprecise hand of my less than meticulous landlord. The dream I had been trying to hold on to since the alarm's first beep was drifting out of reach, like the spots you get in your eyes when you stare at the sun, clearly there but fading, leaving only the fuzzy outlines of shapes. She was in there somewhere, in whatever world that dream had been. I could feel it in my chest, but there was no time left for searching. I had to get going or I'd be late. Pete's door was open, an unlikely occurrence any time before 10 in the morning. He kept odd hours, and many of them were spent partying, and as the smell of beer drifted towards me, I was blessed with the sight of Pete and his two buddies, neither of whom I'd ever seen before, fast asleep on the living room couches, a sea of empty cans strewn around them. I'd met Pete on Craigslist after responding to his post titled, "Roommate Wanted, Quiet Room." He was an easygoing guy, not too particular or nosy. His job was in tech, his office had him working remotely. Most days I would come home to a slightly intoxicated Pete, sitting on the couch with his computer in his lap, sipping a beer or rolling a joint as he ran through lines of code. He was an aficionado of the sweatpant and oversized t-shirt combo, and this morning's was a bright orange and navy blue. The baggy shirt wrinkled up under his back as he snored like a small plane engine, sprawled out like his head with his head against the back of the couch. I watched for a few seconds as he breathed deeply, his eyes just barely missing the rays of sun as they crept down the wall above him. I grabbed eggs from the fridge. Butter first, the start of any good meal. Mix, salt, pepper, scrambled eggs. They say you're supposed to beat the eggs in a little bowl before you pour them in the pan. I just dump them in and stir. The result of my method, a checkered mix of yolk and white composed of a complex variation of chunk sizes, was perfectly suitable to be eaten when tired and alone. The chunks keep it interesting. As I took my last sip of orange juice, the oven let out a chirp, and it was officially 7 and time to head out. I made my way down the stairs with my bike, which I carefully let out through the double doors, only one of which could be opened. I pushed off, climbed on, and headed to the parking authority. The office was at 8th and Filbert, and almost straight shot north from our little section of South Philly. Those first few blocks of my commute were always the calmest. Spring mist hung on skinny trees, just beginning to bloom above the uneven sidewalks. Doors creaked open for working people as they headed out for the day. A young woman sat on the stoop two doors down from our apartment, as she did every day, with a bundle of books in her arms, her pen dashing frantically across the paper she held firmly at the top of her stack. It was quiet as I passed the saloon restaurant on Fulton and cruised towards the boundary of the neighborhood, marked by South Street, which at that hour was still covered in trash dropped by drunks the night before. There, the little concrete blocks and thin trees vanished, replaced instead by bricks and mature ginkgos and honey locusts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sully. All right, our next reader is going to be introduced by someone joining us by Zoom. So we're going to wait for that to get queued up in just a second. Our next reader is Saranya Das Sharma, and Saranya will be introduced by the one and only Anthony DeCurtis. Welcome, Anthony.
My pleasure, Julia. Saranya put together a great collection of stories that are based on the idea of searching for an identity when your family has traveled a great deal, you've lived in different places, and even though it sort of can sound glamorous, it actually is kind of complicated, and there's a kind of complicated relationship to people who kind of come from more smaller towns and really haven't sort of traveled around as much. Now, certainly when Saranya first brought this up to me as a concept, one of the first ideas that occurred to me was, as I'm sure no one listening will disagree, who else to sort of help guide a young Asian woman through these kind of complicated personal questions than an old white man who has only lived in the United States. I felt that setting that aside, however, I was flattered that she would ask, and Saranya and I had worked together before. She shares a quality, which it proved true in this case, with Barack Obama and Michael Jordan, which is it's very difficult for her to truly get interested and commit to a project until the game is on the line. Happily, I'd gone through that with her a couple of times. It occurred again. But like Barack Obama and Michael Jordan, Saranya delivers. She's a winner. And she did a beautiful job on these stories. And I think that what we shared as a kind of duo, working together to try to bring this project to fruition was, I think, the kind of, in many ways, the best motivations for these types of situations, which is she really wanted to write it, and I really wanted to read it. And finally, I couldn't be prouder of the work that she did. So please help me welcome Saranya Das Sharma.
Thank you so much for that wonderful and very funny introduction. I'm going to be reading the ending of my story called Pizza in Milan. It's basically about a group of friends that goes from Delhi to Europe for a post-high school graduation trip. And my protagonist is kind of middle class, whereas all her friends are exorbitantly wealthy and very cultured. And she's kind of navigating that. Mira slightly cursed herself at having read the website wrong and having studied the wrong ballet. She tried to tell herself that she would figure it out, that the music was what would end up being more important, that she would still have enough intelligent points to make, but she could feel her hands shaking slightly. Then the curtain came up, opening on a girl sitting on a balcony reading, seemingly disconnected from the world. Mira's eyes followed her across the stage. Despite the ballet being set 2 centuries ago and half the world away, there was something about this that was so oddly familiar. This feeling of being isolated from the world around you. Mira's eyes briefly flitted over to Shania. She was watching, head nodding slightly in time to the music, occasionally stopping to type little notes into her phone. She felt jealous of Shania's life, of going to operas in London and Sydney every summer, of the seamlessness with which she seemed to fit in wherever they went, whether it was ballets in Milan or over-the-top house parties back in Delhi. On stage, a boy was falling in love with the protagonist, even though he was seemingly engaged to someone else. Mira imagined if this happened back in Delhi, the scandal it would cause, the disgrace that would befall the family. The social circles were so small that everyone was too scared to step even a toe out of line. Mira was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the lights come up for the intermission. "What do you think? Brilliant, no?" Bernadetta asked them. The 3 other girls, all of whom had taken ballet lessons since they were 3 years old, launched into an extremely technical conversation about what they had just seen. They praised the ballons and the arabesques, commenting on how the technicality of the dancing correlated with the beauty and cruelty of the story. Mira's mind swam with all these French words. All she had been able to learn through her cursory Google search that afternoon was plié and jeté. She tried contributing to the conversation, talking about the beautiful costumes and the exquisite sadness on the face of the prima ballerina, throwing in a few words she has just looked up for good measure. Everyone listened to her and nodded politely out of compulsion, but she could tell that none of them were really taking what she was saying seriously. As usual, she was 1 step behind, seemingly always playing catch-up. She finally gave up trying to make conversation, instead pretending to study the program, a futile exercise since it was completely in Italian. The curtains came back up for the second act. Chaos seemed to be breaking out on stage, ballerinas swirling and twirling everywhere. In the first act, Mira was able to vaguely follow along, but now she was completely lost. It felt like the red velvet padded walls were somehow closing in on her. She got up, mumbling something indistinct to Shania about going to the powder room and ignoring her admonishments of how rude it is to leave mid-performance. She wandered the hallways aimlessly, unsure of what she was feeling. She stopped by a gilded mirror and looked at herself in it. From the outside, she looked like the perfect ballet goer. Red lipstick, vintage Miu Miu dress, hair in a chignon. "Pull yourself together, Mira," she told herself. When she finally went back inside, the ballet was over. All of her friends and Bernadetta were standing up, clapping enthusiastically. Mira was ready to go back to the hotel, to go to sleep and try to forget about the weirdness of the past few hours. But Shania wanted to go out, insisting that they had to because it was their first night in Milan. They walked out onto the street, Mira's eyes still adjusting from the dimly lit theater. Bernadetta began taking them to a nearby bar that she promised they would adore. Mira saw a flood of people spilling out of the back door of the bar, happily laughing in an intoxicated haze. She insisted to herself that if she went in there, she too would emerge the same way. Shania ordered a gin and tonic, and so did Mira, even though she had never tried it before. They toasted to a great trip. Mira took a large sip of her drink and gagged at the bitterness. This was the drink that Shania claimed to love so much? She tried swaying her body to the Italian music blasting in the bar like her friends were seeming to do so effortlessly, but it didn't seem to be working. She drained the rest of her glass. Even though it was disgusting, she had spent 12 euros on it. Okay, time to go to the next bar, Chiara said excitedly. There was nothing Mira wanted to do less to buy another overpriced drink and pretend to have fun. "I think I'm going to go back to the hotel, guys," she said, surprising herself by the words coming out of her mouth. You've been a sourpuss all day. Don't leave now," Shania said. "No, I have a headache. I think I'm going to go back and lie down," Mira fibbed. Shania knew it was a lie too, wrinkling her slim nose disapprovingly. But for the first time, Mira didn't really care. She started heading back to the hotel. With her phone dead, she tried following street signs, but they were in Italian and she was drunk. So she ended up on a busy shopping street rather than the quiet residential one that their hotel was on. Mira suddenly realized how hungry she was. She still couldn't figure out why fancy restaurants were so obsessed with tiny portion sizes that wouldn't even satiate a small child. She could see Pizza Hut in front of her, the red glow of the neon sign enticing her. She knew that she was in Milan, where she could probably find the best pizza in the world. Besides, she could hear Shania's voice in her head saying, "We don't eat carbs after sundown, Em," one of the many cardinal rules that the group had to follow to maintain their willowy physiques. She began to turn around to try and get back to the hotel. But then a customer walked out the door, and the air was filled for a brief moment with the intoxicating smell of greasy pizza. Mira decided to give in and walked into the store, ordering a large cheese pizza and a Diet Coke. Despite the slight chill in the night air, she decided to eat outside in the piazza. She sat on a bench, kicking off her 6-inch heels and swinging her blistered feet as she ate. For the first time since they had left Delhi, she realized that she was done with high school, that there was now a diploma that proclaimed Mira Pandit a recipient of the International Baccalaureate. 14 years of grueling all-nighters, exams, and mean girls later, she was finally done. In trying to keep up with her friends, she had seemed to have forgotten that this trip, which she had saved and dreamed of for so long, was meant to celebrate that. She wanted to go to the Duomo and try authentic gelato and aperitivo, even if her friends rolled their eyes and said they had done it 100 times. She would go alone if she had to. All she knew was that she wanted to feel like she did now, happy and free, enjoying Milan. Perhaps she would start tonight by returning to the hotel and watching a trashy Bollywood movie in the language that she understood best. Once she felt she had enough food in her body, she decided to make her way back to the hotel. As she was putting her pizza box away into the trash can, she caught a glimpse of herself in a store window. There she was, her chignon loose, with straight tendrils of black hair poking out from every angle, smudged eyeliner beginning to form a black ring around her eyes, a tiny streak of red lipstick on her teeth. She seemed to have a small tear on the hem of her dress, too. She looked a world apart from the girl in the mirror at La Scala. Normally, she would have been mortified, and perhaps tomorrow she would be again. But tonight, she just laughed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saranya. We have one more reader, and that reader is actually joining us by Zoom, but the advisor of this reader is joining us in person. So it's a beautiful sort of hybrid ending to our event. After this last reader, I hope that you'll all stick around for the reception. It's in the dining room. There will be lovely snacks and yummy things to drink, and you can spill out into the courtyard if you would like. So our 8th and last reader of the evening is Laika Sharif, and Laika will be introduced by Ahmad Almala. So please welcome Ahmad Almala to the podium.
Hi, I'm really so happy to be introducing Laika. I met Laika at a semester where everything ended. She was taking my writing and borders class, and Sully was in that class as well. And that's when I met her. We spent a month or so together in class, and then she disappeared. She went to India. And I think that distance really is what contributed so much to her writing. And, you know, Laika wanted to work with me. And the first time we met to talk about this project, it was obvious that Laika didn't want to follow a plan. And that was great. That was a great beginning for a writing project. And that's when I encouraged her to actually journal, not to write toward a story or a poem or anything like that. And out of that journaling, I think, came the true potential of Laika's writing. There was just great sentencing in the journaling that Laika was doing. And the project and the story sort of started from the middle. And I think that's what was so fascinating about this. And actually, the first story in the collection, The Portrait, was the last thing that Laika wrote. And I'm so proud of her for doing that. And I just want to read, like, if she doesn't get to read from this, I just want to read this paragraph when she's getting a haircut. And there's the voice from the TV coming with a lot of interruptions to the thought processes of the narrator. And this was just a great instance in the story, and I just would like to read it just in case Laika decides not to read it. Zahra felt each stroke of scissors approach closer and closer to her skin, teasing her, beckoning to give her a small slash, just a little of what she might deserve. The blood would leak and trickle lazily along her neck. Her eyes gazed along the mirror back to her, plopped in the seat dorkily in a shiny plastic gown. How was it to exit like this in such miring uncertainty, allowing herself to be contained, to be veiled? Snip. She wondered if she would be considered an offense if she opened her mouth to stand her ground, to refuse those voices. Instead, she would have to let her mouth run bloody, from her tongue held in, bitten. Snip. Those are Laika's words, and I'm really so proud of her work. So I'll leave the stage for her. It's great seeing you, Laika.
This is an extract from The Island. Zahra wasn't sure she wanted to bring it up, this inevitable question she knew she would force herself to pose. It was there, inserted within her, ever since halting face to face with a gigantic billboard outside the airport. The eyes of those two men, maybe years ago, would not have bothered her so sharply, but now she was pulsing with unease. What happened in June? Last June? Yes, I read about it. The whole country did. The Black Day. Suddenly I had friends talking about Lakshadweep, and I would like to hear what you went through. It was our protest against the new law. The government wants our land without us. Zahra listened. It flickered within her. It wasn't a casual flame that the wind could whiff away. It was sealed, airtight, in a cavity at her chest. They wanted to make them kneel. This small, winding road, which had carried all the people, cattle, and transport that was necessary for the tiny island to sustain, would be smashed apart and re-cemented as an immense highway, allowing monster cranes and bulldozers to march through. They would chisel with blunt force ring roads, ports, and tramways out of every exposed piece of ground. Any house that stood in their way would be razed, its interiors ripped out with a surgical swiftness. Mother, daughter, sister, brother, father would be relocated, and if they showed any slight recoil, if they did not kneel down in happiness to their forcible eviction, they would be shoved onto the wet floor of the rapidly expanding island jail for anti-national activity. The coral would be bludgeoned for the erection of magazine-ready water villas, so perfect for glossy print. Their chalk skeletons would be all that was left, the water and its breathing contents soon tranquilized to permanent sleep. The receding, sanded borders of the island would quake under duress, withdrawing at a dizzying rate. The government would sell every inch to any foreign contender with a check, despite the extinction date that would come crashing in faster. Any criticism from citizens across the nation, and more importantly from the islanders facing attack, would be branded as brazen anti-development talk. This was their punishment. This was their occupation. The two men who oversaw it all were already here. They greeted every new visitor with a syrupy smile under the guise of national unity. Their actual purpose was to say, with dead eyes, to any islander that innocuously passed them by, count your days. By the time they reached the beach, Mariam decided to return home to help her mother arrange dinner and agreed to meet Zahra the next day for another foray across town, this time to visit the lone lighthouse. They found one of the last boats departing from the nearby sandbank, which Zahra eagerly boarded, floating away from the island. The timing was as she planned, with the sun slowly creeping towards the horizon, swirls of clouds accompanying it, as the boatmen reminded her that they would only have a few minutes before everyone had to clear the bank and head back ashore. Over there, she nearly tripped while fumbling out of the lowboat, landing on her knees on the wet sand. The strip was only about a few meters long, completely enveloped by undulating water that reflected the mottled orange of the sky. There were a few other tourists already dispersed, although it was impossible to hear any of their conversations because of the gusting wind. Zahra walked towards the other end of the bank, facing the east. She burrowed her toes in the sand as she walked, which was slushy and wet, as the bank was regularly coated by thin poolings of water. At the edge, she kneaded her feet in deeper so that the heavy sand made its weight known, grounding her to the spot. It felt, at the same time, irreconcilably grainy and smooth. She saw the water gently flow in and out, slight motions that were far from being full waves. The edge was here for the sandbank, and if she stepped forward, maybe she would be somewhere else entirely. Like all land, its edge was jagged. It tore the skin that trod on it. It demarcated where the punishment began, exactly where they could be tyrannized. Most of them were forced to stay within, behind the jagged edge, fed with the lie that what lay beyond was worse. How could it be worse? What lay ahead was just ribboning, painless water. Zahra giggled at herself aloud, imagining the other tourists across the bank, in the midst of viewing the unobstructed sunset, catching the sight of a lone girl transfixed by her feet in the sand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laika. It's an extraordinary thing to embark upon an ambitious writing project under any circumstances. I would venture to say this year was most extraordinary in terms of the circumstances that we asked our students to labor under. And I'm just so proud of everyone for finding writing a place to rest and work and thrive and find meaning and navigate this year, which is a thing for all of us. I'm so proud of everyone. Thank you to everyone who came and showed up for these words. And please give all of our honors thesis writers a big round of applause before we head out to the reception.